If you have a Bible with you, I invite you to join me in the Old Testament book of Revelation. The text will also be on the screen behind me. There's also Bibles in the foyer. Those are there for you to borrow for the sermon, or if you need a Bible, you can take one of these Bibles home. You can raise your hand. Marco will be around, and he'll give you one of these Bibles. But a couple of weeks ago, we started this series on the book of Revelation. And this is just our third week in it. The first week, we looked at chapter 1, and that just gave us a good introduction into the book. We got to know a little bit more of the context that this book was written in first century, the Roman Empire. The author is John, who is writing in exile from the island of Patmos. And he's writing these 7 letters to the 7 churches in Asia, which is in modern-day Turkey. And he's writing these letters because he's received a revelation from Jesus, which is where we get the name Revelation. John has received this revelation. Jesus has appeared to John. The resurrected Jesus has appeared to John and has told him to write these things down, to send these letters to these 7 churches. And then getting into chapter 2, chapter 2 begins this series of 7 letters. Last week we looked at the first letter, the letter to Ephesus. This week, we're in the second letter to Smyrna, and it's only a few verses long. And what we're going to do, we're going to just take each letter at a time, one at a time, and so that means we're going to be taking our time through this. This morning, we're only covering like a few verses, right? That is it. These are short letters, but we're going to intentionally spend time each week on each of these 7 letters. And then after that, we're going to pick up the pace. Things are going to get a little faster. And so it's important for us to really spend the time in these 7 letters so that we can understand the context. This is important for our groundwork that we're building so we can really understand the first century and these churches and these areas and the context that John was writing in, because that'll help us understand later what John talks about. And so we're taking our time through this. And this morning we're in the second letter as Jesus sends this through John to the church of Smyrna in Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. Hear the word of the Lord. Write this to the angel of the church in Smyrna. These are the words of the one who is the first and the last, who died and came back to life. I know your hardship and poverty, though you are actually rich. I also know the hurtful things that have been spoken about you by those who say they are Jews, though they are not, but are really Satan's synagogue. Don't be afraid of what you are going to suffer. Look, the devil is going to throw some of you into prison in order to test you. You will suffer hardship for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. If you can hear, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Those who emerge victorious won't be hurt by the second death. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. When I was in seminary, I took this theology class, and one of the assignments was to go to the movies. And so one night, as a class, we all met at the local mall, and we walked around the mall for a while, and we went to the movies as a class together. But the point of the assignment was to view everything we experience through a theological lens, to analyze everything we saw and experienced and question, what does this mean? Is there anything theological I can learn about this? Are there any parallels or differences between going to the mall and the church? Are there any similarities or differences between going to the movies and a Sunday morning worship service? And at first you might think, what? Like, those are two different things, but maybe your imagination is already walking through the movie experience and you're seeing some similarities already, right? And you'd be shocked of how many similarities there are in going to the movies and going to church. One of the biggest thing that stood out to me when I was doing this assignment was walking through the front doors of the theater. And when you go to the theater, you walk in, and you don't walk directly into the theater, right? You walk into this foyer area where there's someone who greets you and welcomes you, right? Often points you in the direction that you need to go. It sounds kind of familiar, right? There's a concession stand, which I guess some churches might have. But what really caught my eye were the walls. I thought of kind of the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, even the Catholic Church and other churches. Oftentimes you'll walk into these ancient churches and you walk into a foyer type area, right? And the walls of the foyer are just covered in paintings. Oftentimes just on the wall, just the walls are covered in paintings of the saints. Paintings of martyrs from years past, people who have died for the faith. So even before you walk into the sanctuary to worship, you walk into this area and you remember all of these Christians who went before you. You remember these saints, you remember these martyrs, these people who you stand in a long line of faithful witnesses to Jesus Christ. And so you remember all of that history before you even go into the sanctuary. When you go to the movies and you're standing in the foyer and you look around, what do you see? You see all of these posters on the walls, right? Posters of movies past with all the famous actors and award-winning scenes and movies and all of these things as a reminder of all of the great things that happened in cinema history before you even go to the new movie that you're about to watch. And there are other similarities, right? So once you get into the movie theater, you go to your seat, and everyone is sitting in a comfy seat facing the same direction. Usually the lights are low, so it's a very individual experience. There's no windows, and everyone is staring at a giant screen, right, and taking in all of the information coming from one central location. Now, there's some similarities between small churches like ours, New Hope, but, we don't have dark lights. We have windows and things like that. So you can see some similarities and some differences. But if you've ever been to a larger church, you might have experienced this exact same thing, right? Where it's auditorium-style seating, and it's oftentimes kind of movie theater-style seats. There's no windows. All the lights are really low, and everyone is facing this giant screen on the stage, right? And so you can already see that there are these eerie similarities between church and the cinema. And we can, look at how maybe the church borrowed, how the movie theaters borrowed some things from the church, like maybe the paintings on the walls, that's borrowed from probably the ancient church. But there is no doubt that there is far more that the church has learned from the entertainment industry. In recent years, there's been kind of a modern phenomenon known as the rise of the megachurch, right? And this is really relatively recent in the past several decades. But before that, all churches were small, medium-sized, maybe a couple larger churches. But with the rise of what has been known as the megachurch, we saw this gathering of thousands of people coming together on a weekend to worship. And at first, this seemed like a wonderful thing. We were celebrating that all of these people were coming to church. All these people were gathering in worship. All these people professing faith in Jesus. And the motivation was very much like reach as many people as possible. Right? So this is a wonderful mindset. It's a great thing to think about. How many people can we reach? How can we make the gospel relevant? But what was behind this was really an intention of catering to the individual, serving as many people as we can, like serving them on a Sunday morning, making Sunday morning experience just a super enjoyable experience, offering the best programs you could possibly offer, the best children's ministry, so that the parents can check their kids in and not have to see them for an hour and a half, and all on this. We'll put in 4 escalators so that people don't have to walk upstairs to the balcony. Like, we're just gonna make this the most enjoyable experience for the people coming, and it became like it's what they call an attraction model, right? A seeker-sensitive model. And I'm sure that the intentions of this were perfectly innocent, but what happens is that the focus of a Sunday morning worship service then became serving the people. And our Sunday service is not a service unto you. This is a service unto God. Now, there is immense pressure on the church. Immense pressure on the church and its leaders to do church in such a way that caters to individuals as consumers. It's the culture that we live in. And it's not just Sunday mornings. It's the programs, right? We got to offer big, relevant programs that want people to get involved and to come, because they will get something out of the programs. It's about our events. Do we have nice events, big events, fun events? It's about our marketing. Do we have a cool logo? Do we have all of these things and flyers and Facebook posts that are relevant, and a social media presence and all of these things? But I also think of our website. Like, so we have a church website. And it's good that we have a church website. I love our church website, and it has some great things on there. And our hosting website, it'll track things for us. It'll track how many people come to the website, kind of where they go, the clicks we get, things like that. But it's also a business, so they try to sell me on things. And so they'll give me these analytics. So here's how many people are coming to your website and where they're going. But if you pay a little bit extra, here's their marketing to me. If you pay a little bit extra, we can help you turn these infrequent visitors into consumers. We will convert these visitors and make them into customers. Now, they probably think, we're business, and so that might make sense, but that is the pressure that the church faces. And I hesitate to say this because I don't want to sound judgmental, but my worry is that many of us, and by church leaders, have given in to this pressure and this temptation to focus on conversion, but not the conversion of souls, the conversion of making infrequent visitors and converting them into consumers of spiritual goods and services that we provide. This is something that clearly needs to be resisted. Resisted by churches, resisted by leaders, and resisted as individual Christians. And as we resist this pressure, I think we can look to the first century church of Smyrna as an example. Jesus sends this letter to Smyrna. It's the second letter that is addressed. The first one was Ephesus, and like Ephesus, Smyrna was also a large port town. It wasn't as large as Ephesus, but it was still a big town, and it was a port town, and it was an important city in the empire. It was only about 35 miles north of Ephesus, so you can see that they were very closely related. It's almost like LA and San Diego, right? And interestingly enough, the letter to Smyrna is the only of the 7 letters that does not have something against them. If you remember last week, John wrote this letter to Ephesus, and it was like, guys, you are really good at boundary keeping, but I have this against you. You let go of the love you had at first. And in coming weeks, we'll see that other letters are written, and they'll say similar things, that you are doing this really well, but I have these things against you. The letter to Smyrna is the only of the 7 letters where Jesus doesn't have anything against them. There is no warning in this letter, no call to change. It's simply like, I see you, I love you, you're doing a great job, it's going to get harder, but stay faithful. Also interesting, and I don't know if this is a causation or a correlation or if it's unrelated, but the city of Smyrna is also the only one of the 7 that still exists as a thriving city today. And it's no longer called Smyrna, it's now the Turkish city of Izmir, but it's the only church that didn't have anything against them, and it's the only city that now still exists even to this day. There might be something here. And even though the city of Smyrna is thriving now, it's important to know that they had a difficult history. Like Ephesus, because of its strategic location, it became the center of a lot of conflict. It became the center of a lot of civil wars. And so it's a city that had a history of being destroyed and then rebuilt. And it had this cycle. It would go through wars, and it would just be completely laid into ruins, and over time, it would build back up again. And just before Rome emerged as a superpower, the people of Smyrna rebuilt the city after it had been lying in ruins for nearly 300 years. And then when Rome was emerging as a superpower and struggling for regional dominance, Smyrna sided with Rome. And it's because of Smyrna that they helped Rome establish their empire in that area. And so because of this, Smyrna became the first city to build a temple to the goddess Roma. And if you remember Roma from last week and the week before, Roma was the goddess of Rome. She embodied the power and wealth and prosperity of Rome. And if you bowed to Roma, then you would get everything that the Roman Empire had to offer. Later, Smyrna was also awarded the honor of building an additional temple to the Emperor Tiberius. And so if you remember for the past couple weeks, another big thing in the Roman Empire was worshiping the emperor. And so if you were a faithful Roman city, you got the honor of building a temple to the emperor so that your people could go and worship him. They would burn a pinch of incense every year and worship and honor to the emperor. And so this city's ability to go from ruins to becoming the preeminent city of the empire gave it the title, the city that died yet lives. The city that died yet lives. And so it's no coincidence that when Jesus opens up his letter to this church in Smyrna, he reminds them he is the Alpha, he is the beginning and the end. He is the one who died and is now alive. But unlike Jesus, Smyrna did not self-resurrect. Much of the credit to this new resurrected life, it belongs to Rome. Rome made Smyrna a regional powerhouse. It made Smyrna the center of emperor worship. And the people of Smyrna, they wanted to continue this. They wanted their city to be a place where the gods looked on favor to its people. So they took emperor worship, they took this god and goddess worship very seriously. By the first century, the city had an acropolis. And you might be familiar with that term acropolis. It's most associated with the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. Right? You might see famous pictures of the Parthenon. Right? That's the Acropolis of all these temples sitting on top of a mountain in the middle of Athens, Greece. Right? And so Smyrna had the same thing. They had a mountain that overlooked the city of Smyrna. It was on the coast. And so the sailors sailing into the city would see this mountain, this Acropolis, and it was adorned with all of these temples. And it became known as the crown of Smyrna. It was their pride and joy. It was their reward for being faithful to the Roman Empire. And so we can see the importance of context here. Smyrna was a city that experienced great difficulty. It was a city that was dead and is now alive. And due to their allegiance to the Roman Empire, they have received their reward. They have received a crown in the form of these temples to gods and goddesses and emperors. The church of Smyrna, in a similar way, experienced great difficulty. But because of their loyalty to the one who died and is now alive, and they get to identify with that resurrected life, they are promised their reward. And it's not a crown made of marble statues and temples. They are promised a crown of life. And with that crown comes the promise that you will not be hurt by the second death. But for now, they are in great difficulty. And it comes on two fronts. The first front of their difficulty comes from Rome itself. One of the great difficulties that Rome faced as a massive empire was how to unite everyone. How to unite an empire that was so vast, that contained so many different peoples and religions and cultures and languages, and get everyone to stay on the same page without civil war breaking out all the time. And it begins with what's called the Pax Romana. It's that Latin word that means the Roman peace. And the Roman peace was established this way. It was like, listen, we have come in and conquered you. You now belong to us, right? You're part of the Roman Empire. Here's how things are going to go. We're going to give you the law of how things work. And if you keep the law that we give you, if you don't stir up any trouble, if you squash any rebellion, zero rebellion is allowed. If there's anything that goes against Rome, you have to execute it. You got to get rid of it. It cannot stand. So as long as there's no rebellion, no uprisings, then we will make your life better. We'll make your life easier. We'll give you infrastructure. We'll give you roads. We'll give you waterways. We'll give you jobs. We'll make the economy great. Your life will be good. Your life will be easy, but don't even think about rebelling. If you try to rebel, we'll come in and squash you too. So we need you to keep this peace that we're establishing. And the second thing is, we need you to honor the emperor. And by doing that, what was required is every year they would go to one of these temples of the emperor and they would burn a pinch of incense. That's all it was. You go to the altar there and burn a pinch of incense. We're not asking too much, right? Just a little bit. Just to know you honor us. You worship Caesar. And you will keep the peace. And if you do that, everyone's lives will be better. You can imagine what it would be like or maybe you can't, as a first century Christian living under this rule. You have just come to know Jesus, and he has claimed to be the Lord of your heart, the Lord of your life, the Lord of all the world. And there is no other God besides him. And you are professing this faith, and now you're in the Roman Empire, and you're called to go and burn this little pinch of incense in worship to Caesar. That'd be tough. What would happen if you didn't do it? I mean, you believe in Jesus now. The first commandment of the 10 Commandments is have no other gods besides me. And now you're being called to go and offer this bit of worship to a different God. And the consequences could have been pretty dire. And this is in first century Rome. To make it like if any sort of modern parallel would be this. I think of like Colin Kaepernick. And regardless of what you think about him or what he did, like this is someone, if you don't know, was a football player in the NFL who felt distress over the violence he was seeing against black people in America, particularly by the police force. And he didn't know what to do about it, but he was distressed about it, and so during the national anthem, instead of standing like we all do, like we go to the any sports events, we sing the national anthem, right? And we do this, and we all stand, we uncover our heads, we put our hands on our hearts, and we honor the flag, we honor the country that we belong to, and it's good to be patriotic. It's good to have a sense of loyalty to the place that you belong to, But even here in America, when we see someone not stand for the national anthem or the Pledge of Allegiance, when we see someone not participate, even here, we think suspicious. Even here, they might have negative consequences. We might treat them differently. And like Colin Kaepernick, he even lost his job practicing his freedom to do just that. And we are a people who are proud that we live in a free country. We see this all the time, and then when someone like him uses his freedom in a way that we find is suspicious, the consequences can be dire even here. So imagine being in the first century in the Roman Empire. If you did not burn that piece of incense to Rome, you were viewed with extreme suspicion, both religiously and politically. If you did not burn that pinch of incense, best case scenario, you lost your job. You wouldn't be allowed in the trade guilds. You wouldn't be allowed to participate in the economy. You wouldn't be allowed in the marketplaces. Worst case scenario, you got imprisoned and lost your life. And so we see this immense pressure from the Roman Empire to keep this false peace that they had, to bring worship to Rome. The second pressure that they faced came from the Jewish community in Smyrna. In verse 9, we have one of these difficult verses that we don't really like very much. But in verse 9, it tells us that Jesus is writing this through John to this church. And he says, I know that there are hurtful things that have been said about you by the Jews in Smyrna. And he says, but they're not really. They're really Satan's synagogue. Now, it's really important not to take a verse like this and apply it in an anti-Semitic way, right? Because that is not the point of this verse. It is one of those verses that makes us a bit uncomfortable, and it's something that needs to be addressed. But it is likely that the Jews here in Smyrna had some sort of an exemption from burning that pinch of incense, an exemption from emperor worship. And we see this during this time in other places, that when Rome came and conquered, the Jewish people already had their practices of worship, and so they cut a deal with the Jewish people and said, listen, as long, again, as there's no uprising, and you keep the peace, and you squash any uprising, then we'll let you continue to worship Yahweh freely, and you won't have to worship the emperor or the goddess Roma. And so it seems likely that they had this agreement. And then these Christians come along who are claiming a Jewish heritage, because that's what we do as Christians. We believe in the Jewish Messiah, that he came. And so we have not only the New Testament, we have the Old Testament. Right? This is our heritage. We belong, as the New Testament describes, we have been grafted in. We are the new branches that have been grafted into the old. And so we have this group of probably Gentile Christians who are claiming that they have been grafted in to the Jewish community. But the Roman Empire is saying, you're not Jews. We know who you are. You're Gentiles. We conquered you, and you need to burn incense to the emperor. Unless the Jews are saying you belong to them, and the Jews are saying they don't belong to us. Right? They did not want to disrupt the peace that they had. They had a good deal. They had a good thing going with the Roman Empire, and they did not want to ruin that. And so these Gentile Christians are risking ruining that relationship. And so they start talking bad about these Christians. They start blaspheming them. They start saying untrue things about them. In short, they stopped behaving like the people of God. And as we've seen throughout Scripture, when we stop behaving like the people of God, eventually God stops claiming us as his God. And so we see this pressure that the church is going through, pressure from the Roman Empire, pressure from the Jewish community that is slandering them and making them look bad. And again, not to take that in any anti-Semitic way, because Lord knows that the Jews have suffered far more worse in the hands of Christians than what was going on here. But the reality is these Christians in Smyrna were doing nothing wrong. They were simply trying to follow Jesus. And they're being faced with persecution and slander and imprisonment and death. Verse 10, it tells us that they're warning you, you will suffer hardship. For 10 days, you will suffer hardship. And the 10 days is interesting. Given the symbolic nature of the book of Revelation, it's a big question. Well, what is that significant of? What is the 10 days significant of? And some scholars have pointed out that 10 days is the average period of time between taken into custody by the state, being tried for treason, and being publicly executed. It only took 10 days on average. Rome did not like to burden itself with long trials, and it did not like the idea of any rebellion emerging. So they were quick and swift. It took 10 days to arrest, try, and execute someone for treason. Another possibility is that the 10 days refers back to a time when Daniel and his friends were tested. We referenced Daniel chapter 1 a couple of weeks ago, and we'll see Daniel later in the book, but if you remember, this was a time when Israel was in exile in Babylon. And the Babylonian king took the brightest of the Jewish inhabitants. He took Daniel and his friends, and instead of enslaving them, he gave them the best education, he gave them the best training, he gave them good jobs, he gave them all of this stuff in an effort to make them Babylonians, to take away their Jewishness and make them into loyal Babylonians. Kind of a similar thing what Rome does to the Christians. And Daniel and his friends said, you know what, we're here, we'll take your jobs, we'll take your education, we'll be in your culture, we'll do this. But one thing that they required them to do that they refused is the king wanted them to eat the meat from his table, to drink the wine from his table. And Daniel and his friends says, we won't do that. And I want to read to you just a few verses in Daniel chapter 1, this is 11 through 15. It says, "So Daniel spoke to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And Daniel said this, 'Why not test your servants for 10 days? You could give us a diet of vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance to the appearance of the young men who ate the king's food. Then deal with your servants as according to what you see.' The guard decided to go along with their plan and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating the king's food." These Christians are warned that they will be tested for 10 days. But if they endure, even to the point of death, they will look better than everyone else. They will be given a crown of life. So these Christians were tested, and many of them would die. But we know that's not the end of their story. With this crown of life, they are promised that they, unlike the others in the city of Smyrna, will not be hurt by the second death. And so we can see how we are given this revelation to show us the complete reality of what was going on. Now we can begin to see, not merely with our materialistic eyes, we can begin to see with our spiritual eyes and understand the truth of the situation. Because from the perspective of earth, the city of Smyrna was rich and powerful. From the perspective of earth, the city was a crown that was bestowed on it by the most powerful empire on earth. From the perspective of earth, the Christians in Smyrna were poor and weak and insignificant and foolish. But from the perspective of heaven, the city of Smyrna was poor because it had placed its hope in the powers that cannot survive the second death. The crown of Smyrna, which was the city's source of pride, would eventually crumble into ruins. Like all other material objects and powers and principalities and reigns and rules. From the perspective of heaven, the church of Smyrna, Jesus says, "You are rich." Because its members have oriented their lives together toward a crown of life that never fades, never falls into ruin, and can never be taken away. Now, this is something I don't want us to overlook or move past too quickly. You know, there are these church assessments, right? Just like other assessments. And they're fine and good and all, and they can be a good tool and provide helpful insights, but oftentimes church assessments see things in worldly, materialistic eyes. They analyze numbers, attendance, how many salvations, how many baptisms, what do your finances look like, how much debt do you have, what is this, and like all like your property and this and that and upkeep and leadership and different styles and things, and all that is fine and good, and we have to deal with those things. But they often fail to assess the church with the eyes of Jesus. Because when Jesus assesses the church, the assessment is not about how much the church can offer to its people, while requiring very little in return. How can the church make the people's lives easier? How can the church take care of all your needs, make you comfortable. And now there are times where the church does step in the gap of need, primarily, as Scripture calls us to, for the widow and the orphan and the poor and the immigrant. So this is our calling. We are meant to fill in that gap of need, but it is not about how well we just pamper everyone. Jesus' assessment of the church is not about how many programs we can offer, how many ministries we can sustain, or how our worship service makes you feel. The heavenly assessment doesn't look at how much the church can offer its people. The heavenly assessment looks at how we keep faith in Christ and in His church when the church can provide very little and yet require so very much. The church of Smyrna could not offer much to its people, not in the form of worldly things. And it required a lot of faithfulness, a lot of loyalty, even to the point of death. And this is the only church Jesus says, I have nothing against you. You are great in my eyes. I'd like to end with a story about a martyr that died in Smyrna. His name was Polycarp. He was a bishop, and he was burned at the stake in about 156 CE. And this was only about 50 years after this letter was written. And some scholars think that Polycarp was a disciple of John. He might have even been the one who went around with this letter and read it at Smyrna. And we have this written account of his martyrdom that really demonstrates the issue that Christians were facing here in the 1st and 2nd century. Now remember, and this was kind of ironic, I mentioned a couple weeks ago that the Christians, one of their primary allegations was that they were called atheists, right? Because they would not worship the emperor. They denied the goddess Roma, they denied the deity of their emperor gods, and they believed in Jesus. And according to the Roman Empire, Jesus was not a god, much less the God. And so they were viewed as atheists and often arrested, tried, and sentenced to death because of their atheism. And so I want to read to you a part of this this description of his death. It says this: the whole multitude, marveling at the bravery of the God-loving and God-fearing race of Christians, began shouting, "Away with the atheists, find Polycarp." Polycarp entered the stadium. The proconsul tried to persuade him to recant, saying, "Have respect for your age," and other such things as they were accustomed to saying. "Swear by the genius of Caesar, repent, say, away with the atheists." So Polycarp solemnly looked to the whole crowd of lawless heathen who were in the stadium, motioned toward them with his hand, and then groaned as he looked up to heaven and said, "Away with the atheists." But when the magistrate persisted and said, "Swear an oath, and I will release you, revile Christ," Polycarp replied, "For 86 years I have been his servant. He has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my King who saved me? I am a Christian." It's reported that he then prayed that he would be a worthy offering unto God. And when they burned him at the stake, it's reported that the aroma that filled the stadium was like that of baked bread, or like silver or gold being refined in a furnace. Now, this is not a price that we will likely have to pay. But my prayer is that we as a church would be a community so centered around Christ that when much is given, but much is also required. That we can be a place where even in our poverty, we know our riches. And where we can freely give ourselves for the sake of the city that we live in, for the sake of the world that God so loves, and for the sake of the kingdom of heaven to which we belong. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this city of Smyrna and the difficulty they faced. We are humbled by their faithfulness to you. And we confess there are times where we just want to be consumers, where we just want to be comfortable, where we just want to be fed, where we just want to be given things. But the church that is great in your eyes is not a church that just pampers us, but is the church that challenges us. The church that requires us to give all that we have and all that we are for the sake of your kingdom, that it might be a reality here. So we ask that you help us in this. For we know we are poor, but God, in you we are rich. Thank you for reminding us of this. In the name of your Son, Jesus, who was and is to come, to the one who died and is now alive forever, to the one who gives us our crown of life. It's his name we pray and worship. Amen.